Tehran in the early 1950s was a city caught between old power and new ambition. The streets were crowded, dusty, and politically charged. Nationalist posters hung beside royal portraits of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Students chanted in favor of democracy, clerics warned of foreign plots, and shopkeepers whispered about the economic crisis tightening around their homes. Everyone felt something shifting. No one knew where it would break. At the center of this tension stood Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, elected and immensely popular, known for his frail body but fierce will. In March 1951, he made a decision that shook the world. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, ending Britain's decades-long control of Iran's oil. The British government reacted with outrage. London described it as an illegal seizure. Mossadegh and his supporters described it as Iran standing up. The standoff grew into an international crisis. Britain responded with a global embargo, freezing Iran's assets and blocking its oil exports. Iran's economy collapsed. Long lines formed for basic goods. Mossadegh refused to reverse course, and his popularity, though still strong, began to fracture under the weight of economic pain. Declassified CIA documents show that by late 1952, the Truman administration still resisted Britain's demand for a coup. But when Dwight D. Eisenhower entered the White House in January 1953, everything changed. His top advisors, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, believed Mossadegh was pushing Iran toward the Soviet sphere. The Cold War lens now magnified every crisis. Britain pressed hard, warning that Iran could fall like a ripe plum into Moscow's hands. By spring 1953, the CIA approved a covert plan, removed Mossadegh, and strengthened the Shah's rule. The operation was given a code name, TPAJAX. The man chosen to run it on the ground was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, and a senior CIA officer stationed in the Middle East. At just 37, he carried a calm voice, a diplomatic manner, and a heavy assignment. Later, he would admit privately that the responsibility left him restless, pacing through long nights in Tehran. He believed he was protecting U.S. interests, but he also felt a moral weight he could not shake. Roosevelt arrived covertly in Tehran in July 1953, slipping through the city under aliases, sometimes using back entrances to safe houses. His first task was building a coalition: military officers, clerics, underground networks, and street mobs, many paid directly through CIA funds, confirmed in declassified financial documents. British operatives coordinated from Cyprus and Beirut. The Shah, fearful and hesitant, signed the necessary decrees only after repeated pressure. Tehran was turning into a stage for a secret war. Tanks were positioned, crowds were manipulated, newspapers were bribed, and royalist officers waited for the signal. And beneath all this, as Roosevelt later wrote, he could barely sleep. He knew the city was one wrong move away from chaos. But what the CIA didn't anticipate was that the coup would fail disastrously the first time, and Roosevelt would have to decide whether to flee Iran or attempt something far more dangerous. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. sat in a dimly lit safe house on the night of August 15, 1953, chain-smoking and listening for updates that came in broken whispers through trusted couriers. The plan, months in the making, was unfolding. Pro-Shah military units were supposed to seize key installations, arrest Prime Minister Mossadegh, and announce the Shah's firman dismissing him. But by midnight, the operation was unraveling. Earlier that evening, Colonel Nimitala Nassiri, commander of the Imperial Guard and a crucial CIA-backed officer, arrived at Mossadegh's residence with the Shah's dismissal order. Mossadegh had been tipped off. Nassiri was arrested on the spot. Word spread quickly through intelligence channels. The coup had failed. This was not speculation. Declassified CIA files confirmed the collapse. Roosevelt's carefully constructed network of military units lost coordination. Mossadegh's supporters seized the initiative. Pro-government crowds began gathering in the streets. Radio Tehran broadcast that a royalist plot had been defeated. Then came the most shocking blow. The Shah fled the country, escaping first to Baghdad, then to Rome. For the CIA, this was a nightmare scenario. The operation was supposed to strengthen the Shah, not drive him out of Iran. In the safe house, Roosevelt faced a choice that only a handful of people in the world knew existed. He could evacuate immediately, Washington would understand. Or he could attempt the unthinkable, revive a coup that had already failed in full view of the world. The pressure was immense. British MI6 officers, monitoring from Cyprus and Beirut, expected the CIA to stand down. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran was rattled. Ambassador Lloyd Henderson quietly prepared for the possibility of evacuation. But Roosevelt refused to leave. Declassified internal CIA histories later revealed that Roosevelt believed Mossadegh's victory was fragile. Tehran was tense, disoriented, and full of clashing loyalties. The coup had collapsed, but not the underlying forces. Roosevelt decided to exploit the confusion. He began contacting pro-Shah clerics, strongmen, and military officers through encrypted notes, coded phone calls, and trusted intermediaries. CIA funds were funneled into the bazaars to mobilize crowds. Newspapers were paid to print stories accusing Mossadegh of planning to abolish the monarchy. Roosevelt personally met with General Fazlollah Zahedi, the man the CIA intended to replace Mossadegh, who was now hiding from government security forces. For 48 hours, Tehran was a city without balance. Pro-Mossadegh groups marched. Anti-Mossadegh groups countered. Political posters were torn down by one crowd, replaced by another within minutes. Rumors of Soviet infiltration, royalist plots, and army defections filled every cafe. Roosevelt rarely slept. Safehouse logs and later interviews show that he stayed awake on stimulants, mapping every street where loyalties could shift. He feared Mossadegh's forces would locate him and arrest him as a foreign agitator. His stress mounted when a senior CIA case officer warned him that Washington expected him to leave Iran immediately. The operation was considered lost. Roosevelt ignored the instruction. Instead, he issued one of the riskiest commands in CIA history. The operation would continue, despite the Shah's escape and the coup's failure. Tehran on August 17, 1953, was a city simmering under layers of confusion and fear. The Shah was gone. Mossadegh appeared triumphant. The military was splintered. And yet, the streets, unpredictable, emotional, and explosive, remained the one force no one fully controlled. Kermit Roosevelt Jr., hiding in one of several CIA safehouses, saw opportunity where others saw collapse. According to declassified CIA operational summaries, Roosevelt decided that the only path left was to mobilize Tehran's streets, not simply through crowds, but through Iran's most influential social engines, the bazaars, the clerical networks, and the rumor mills that spread faster than radio broadcasts. CIA funds, documented in the released 2013 TPAJAX internal history, were pushed deep into the marketplaces. Trusted Iranian intermediaries passed cash to key merchants' guilds, encouraging them to shut down stalls, stir frustration, and amplify the narrative that Mossadegh was destroying Iran's economy. Many merchants already blamed the oil embargo for their financial ruin. With money in the right hands, Roosevelt ensured their anger appeared publicly and loudly. By noon, small groups began shouting slogans not against the Shah but against Mossadegh's austerity measures. Word spread that the Prime Minister has lost control. These slogans were crafted inside CIA safehouses. British intelligence had spent years cultivating conservative clerics opposed to Mossadegh's secular nationalism. Now, with MI6's channels reactivated, Roosevelt coordinated through trusted intermediaries to encourage public sermons. That evening, in mosques across Tehran, clerics denounced political chaos and warned that Iran might fall to communism if the monarchy collapsed. None mentioned foreign influence, but recordings in British archives confirm MI6 guidance behind the scenes. The messaging was sharp. Iran needed stability. Iran needed the Shah. Newspapers were bribed using CIA funds to publish front-page claims that Mossadegh was seeking dictatorial powers. Others accused him of planning to abolish the monarchy entirely. Most damaging was a rumor, spread through taxi drivers, street storytellers, and bazaar merchants, that Mossadegh had secretly struck a deal with the Soviet Union. Factually untrue, but devastatingly effective in Cold War Tehran. Declassified CIA memos later admitted that propaganda was the backbone of the second coup attempt. Another documented channel was the hiring of street muscle. Roosevelt coordinated with Shaban Jafari, known as Shaban the Brainless, a well-known strongman with deep connections to Tehran's rougher crowds. On August 18th, groups loyal to Jafari marched carrying pictures of the Shah and denouncing Mossadegh. Fights erupted. Police hesitated. Some army units, unsure whom to obey, stood down. CIA records confirmed that these crowds were encouraged and financially supported. Through all this, Roosevelt barely slept. Every hour, he moved between safehouses, relying on coded messages and couriers. Declassified memoirs show he feared discovery at any moment. But the pressure was working. By dawn of August 19th, Tehran felt different. Crowds were swelling. Newspapers were attacking Mossadegh relentlessly. Bazaar merchants were furious. Clerics were warning of national doom. The streets were no longer calm. They were combustible. Roosevelt sensed a shift. Iran's capital was ready to tip. Morning light on August 19, 1953, revealed a Tehran no longer waiting to see what would happen. The city was moving, fast, loud, and dangerously. From the bazaars to the northern suburbs, crowds surged into the streets. Some carried photographs of the Shah. Others chanted for the monarchy. And many simply followed the momentum, swept into the chaos. Declassified CIA operational notes and State Department cables described the shift as sudden and decisive. But behind the scenes, it was anything but spontaneous. Paid demonstrators, funded by CIA cash documented in the 2013 TPAJAX files, began calling for Mossadegh's removal. Their chants drew curious bystanders who joined out of frustration, fear, or simple excitement. Within an hour, the crowd swelled. Roosevelt, hiding in a safe house, received word from Iranian intermediaries. The streets are with us. But he knew that enthusiasm wasn't enough. To take down a sitting prime minister, he needed the Iranian military. The army hesitates. Tehran's military units were divided and deeply confused. Some officers supported Mossadegh. Others were fiercely loyal to the Shah. Most were simply waiting for anyone, to show clear authority. The CIA had placed key contacts within the officer corps, Colonel Karimi, Colonel Farzanegin, and others documented in declassified sources. They had been preparing for days, but only if the public appeared overwhelmingly pro-Shah. Now, seeing the streets erupt, the officers sensed momentum. By mid-morning, tanks and armored vehicles began rolling out of their barracks, hesitant at first, then committed as more units defected to the royalist side. Shaban Jafari's street fighters take the front. Moving with surprising coordination, Shaban Jafari and his network of strongmen stormed key intersections. CIA memos acknowledged their involvement as useful assets. They ripped down Mossadegh posters, raised the Shah's portrait, and physically cleared the way for pro-Shah civilians. Sporadic gunfire erupted as pro-Mossadegh groups clashed with them. Violence grew. Bodies began to fall. Radio Tehran, the Hydra of information. Control of Radio Tehran was essential. Whoever held the radio controlled the country's narrative. CIA-linked groups attacked it repeatedly, but Mossadegh's forces repelled them. Declassified British and American coordination logs describe Radio Tehran as the most contested point in the capital. Meanwhile, rumors spread, some organic, many seeded by CIA agents, that Mossadegh had fled Iran, that Soviet forces were preparing to intervene, that the Shah was already returning. None were true, but all were effective. The critical turn, military loyalty collapses. Shortly after noon, the turning point arrived. A tank battalion, originally loyal to Mossadegh, switched sides. Their commander, persuaded by a mixture of uncertainty and assurances from fellow officers, ordered his men to support the pro-Shah uprising. Declassified CIA reports note this moment as the coup's decisive break. The military, seeing tanks in the streets supporting the Shah, rapidly fractured. Officers who had remained neutral stepped forward. Units that were hesitant now openly declared for the monarchy. 6. March on Mossadegh's house. As thousands moved with tanks toward Mossadegh's residence, Roosevelt received a whispered message from his courier. They are advancing. If they succeed, this ends today. Roosevelt, who had spent days without sleep, felt his stomach twist. Nothing about this was guaranteed. A single loyalist unit could still crush the uprising. The city was a powder keg, and the flames were only rising. By early afternoon on August 19, 1953, Tehran thundered with a sound that witnesses later described as a city shaking under its own heartbeat. Tanks loyal to the Shah moved through narrow streets, crushing debris and scattering the last pockets of resistance. Behind them surged thousands of civilians, some driven by genuine royalism, others by rage, and many simply caught in the tide created by the propaganda and money that had been flowing for days. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. received fragmented updates from couriers racing between safehouses. Everything now focused on one location, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh's residence on Koch Avenue, which had become the final fortress of his government. Mossadegh, aware of the military shifts, had ordered loyal units and the Tehran police to defend the compound. He had not fled. He was waiting. The first tank fired a warning shot as it approached the high walls surrounding the residence. Mossadegh's guards returned fire immediately. The battle intensified within minutes. Declassified State Department cables describe sustained gunfire, heavy weapons on both sides, and significant civilian presence in the streets nearby. Roofs along the road filled with armed civilians, some protecting Mossadegh, others aiding the royalist military. Inside, Mossadegh reportedly moved through the house, checking on his guards, giving brief orders, and showing none of the panic outsiders expected. CIA records confirm he maintained control until communication lines were cut and loyal units began running low on ammunition. Outside, the royalist forces strengthened. Tanks fired directly into the compound walls, creating breaches. Crowds pushed forward, emboldened by the growing perception that victory was inevitable. Shaban Jafari's men, well-paid and aggressive, moved ahead of the crowds, climbing over rubble and hurling homemade incendiaries. A large explosion tore open part of the compound wall. Royalist troops surged through the breach. Gunfire echoed from multiple directions. Mossadegh's defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, began to fall back deeper into the house. Several declassified CIA and embassy documents note that even in this chaos, Mossadegh refused to leave through escape routes offered by his aides. By late afternoon, the defenders could no longer hold. Mossadegh ordered the surrender to avoid further bloodshed. He escaped over a garden wall with his personal guards, but turned himself in the next day. His house was looted within minutes by mobs who believed they were punishing a traitor to the monarchy. When word reached Roosevelt, he sat silently in the safe house. The coup, which had failed only days earlier, had now succeeded in dramatic, violent fashion. Tehran was in celebratory chaos. Royalist crowds chanted the Shah's name. Tanks rolled freely through the streets. Fires burned where clashes had taken place. That evening, General Fazlollah Zahedi, long the CIA's chosen replacement for Mossadegh, emerged from hiding and announced himself as the new prime minister. Declassified CIA documents confirm Roosevelt personally arranged Zahedi's transport and public appearance. As night fell, the celebrations continued. But Roosevelt, according to later interviews and his own memoir, felt none of it. Success, he wrote, did not quiet the mind. For the first time since the mission began, he lay down, but sleep still refused to come. The sun had barely risen on August 20th, 1953, when the Shah boarded a plane in Rome to return to Iran. Only 3 days earlier, he had fled the country believing his reign was finished. Now, with Mossadegh overthrown and General Fazlollah Zahedi installed, the monarchy was restored. Photographs from that morning show the Shah looking stunned, even hesitant, as he faced reporters. History had swung back in his favor, but not by his actions. The work had been done by others, on the streets, in the barracks, and in the shadows. Tehran welcomed him with orchestrated celebration. Crowds filled the streets waving flags, some genuinely joyous, others responding to the same mechanisms that had helped fuel the coup itself. CIA internal documents, later declassified, acknowledged that money continued flowing to ensure strong pro-Shah demonstrations in the days following his return. The monarchy, though restored, remained fragile and deeply dependent on external support. In a quiet safe house far from the celebrations, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. sat alone. He had met briefly with Zahedi and then with the Shah, who thanked him warmly. But the gratitude only deepened Roosevelt's unease. The coup had succeeded, but at a cost he could not fully measure. Iran's democracy had been overturned. Mossadegh, once seen in Washington as a moderate nationalist, was now in custody awaiting trial for treason. Hundreds had died in the street battles. And the geopolitical consequences of this victory, Roosevelt sensed, had only begun. In the weeks that followed, Roosevelt helped finalize the CIA's classified history of the operation. The documents, later released in heavily redacted form, described TPAJAX as a model operation and a successful act of covert intervention. Yet even in his official reports, Roosevelt left hints of discomfort. He noted that Mossadegh had not been a communist, nor controlled by Moscow. He emphasized the emotional volatility of the crowds, the unpredictability of the army, and the razor-thin margin that separated success from catastrophe. When Roosevelt left Iran at the end of August 1953, he did so quietly, without ceremony. On the flight home, according to his later accounts, he felt an overwhelming exhaustion, physical, moral, historical. The mission had consumed weeks of sleepless nights and constant fear of arrest or execution. But what stayed with him long after was something deeper, the realization that an entire nation's political future had been reshaped by a handful of men operating in the dark. In the decades that followed, the consequences became increasingly clear. The Shah's rule grew more autocratic. Discontent simmered. Anti-American sentiment deepened, fueled by knowledge of foreign interference. And in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution toppled the monarchy, protesters shouted a name with bitter clarity: 1953. Roosevelt rarely spoke publicly about the coup afterward. Friends recounted that he avoided the topic unless pressed, and even then, his answers were brief, guarded, and heavy. In private, he admitted that for years he woke in the night replaying the images of Tehran burning, crowds fighting, tanks rolling toward Mossadegh's home. He had achieved what Washington wanted. But the victory offered no peace. And history, as the declassified record now shows, never let him sleep easily again.